This backyard was in rough shape, so we've decided it's about time we give it some love. But with what we wanted to do back here, we knew it was going to cost a decent amount. We wanted to have a deck right outside these doors that led down to a larger patio area that also connected to a pathway leading to the front of the house. After speaking with the local contractor, we got quoted this for a project of this size. Even though materials make up a good portion of the cost, we wanted to see if we could do it for less by taking this on DIY. At the end of the video, I'll break down the final costs and time that it took and see which was the better option, either hiring this out or doing it DIY. I quickly made a design in SketchUp to give us an idea of what exactly we're doing back here. And other than myself, I had the assistance from my sister, brother-in-law, and a friend. We started with getting our measurements and exact layout of the deck. We wanted to make sure it was the right size and height. Once the deck was mapped out, we found our spots where the footings needed to be dug. Where I live, the footings need to be 4 feet deep, so we rented this auger to help save time and our backs. These footings will be the main support for the deck girders and essentially hold the deck up off the ground, keeping it in place. With the holes finished, we added in the sono tubes. And then it was time for concrete. We mixed 12 eggs total, which gave us just enough for all 4. We left them to dry, and that was all for day 1. The next day was all about the deck. All the lumber arrived, so we brought it to the back. We made sure the ground below the deck was sloping away from the house so that any water that made its way through the deck would run away from the foundation. And if you also didn't realize, we're leaving those patio stones alone as they weren't really in the way and are actually helping as a weed barrier. For the girders, these are the main supports that the deck joists will be resting on as mentioned earlier. To make them, we're using 2 2x8s that are 16 feet in length and cutting them down to 14 feet, which will be the width of our deck. We then screwed them together and our first girder was complete. We basically repeated this one more time as we needed 2 of them. And once both were done, we placed them onto the footings that were now dry and checked the level, which was spot on. These then get screwed into the brackets that we placed in the footings, which now locks it all together. We then moved on to the joists. To frame the actual deck, we'll be using 2x6s that are 12 feet in length, which will span the girders in the opposite direction. This part was actually pretty straightforward and doesn't need too much of an explanation. Basically, we determined our spacing would be 16 inches on center, so all we did was pre-mark our joist locations on the rim board and then simply went one by one screwing each joist in place. A good tip is to use a speed square here to ensure the joist was straight before screwing it in. Our method here was to build the entire frame, then slide it into place before permanently attaching it to the girders below. And some of these boards had crazy warp, but they'll be straightened out once we add blocking. Once we positioned the frame in place, we chalk lined the ends to trim a few boards since some of them were a little longer than a true 12 feet. We were then able to toe screw the other rim board in place and the frame was put together. Since the space between each joist was 14.5 inches, we cut a scrap piece of wood to this size to act as our spacer, ensuring we had enough width throughout. One extra step we did was double up most of the joists with the lumber from an old deck that was laying around. This was primarily to help with some of the bounce in the deck, but also allowed us to reduce some of the waste we had. This is totally not needed, but we didn't mind doing the extra work. I will say though, this thing is solid. We then went through adding blocking between every joist, which tied everything together and helped straighten out those warped boards that I mentioned earlier. This is where all the end cuts and scrap wood came in clutch. The last thing we had to do was add in extra blocking where the deck border would be, since it'll be installed parallel to the joists. With the deck framing all wrapped up, that marks the end of day 2. As the deck was nearing completion, we wanted to get a head start on the patio and walkway. So to assist us, we rented this machine to help us grade the patio area, which would be way more efficient than doing it by hand. We also had a bunch of screening to bring back here, so it was well worth it. I'll include the rental cost at the end as well. But before anything, we had to establish our grade and find out where high and low spots were. We had to remove a few inches of dirt regardless, since we'd be adding a layer of screening as our sub-base for the patio stones. It may be a little hard to tell, but this entire backyard was very uneven. The high point was at the back near the fence, and everything seemed to slope towards the middle. All this meant was we had to remove more dirt from the back compared to the front near the deck. We will be adding a small retaining wall here though, which you'll see shortly. This retaining wall will help hold the elevation, but also allow us to take advantage of it and create a raised garden bed. You could argue we didn't need it, but we thought it would add a nice element to this area. A huge bonus was that the other half of the backyard had a giant low spot, so we used all this excess dirt we were removing and dumped it there to level it off. We also removed a small amount of dirt on the side of the house, since our patio stone walkway would be here and required screening as well. I will be honest, this machine was fairly simple to get the hang of and was a great decision as we were flying through this step of the process. After factoring in the layer of screening, the thickness of our patio stones, and a step up onto the deck, we've removed enough dirt, so now it was time to lay down some weed mat. We used the old patio stones to place on top, which we were burying with the screening. On day 3, the screening was delivered, so we fired up the machine and started moving it to the back. This step of the build was pretty simple. We would dump screening over this entire area, as you can see, until our desired depth was achieved. And the fact that this machine fit back here was unreal. It was literally the perfect size. We then raked it all over, ensuring we had a nice and even surface. We also wanted a slight slope towards the grass so that water would hit the patio and run off to the side. And once we were happy with everything, we brought back this plate compactor to give this whole area a much needed compacting. This is a crucial step that must be done since your patio stones sit on top of this and is what keeps it from sinking or shifting. All of our composite decking arrived, which meant we could work on the deck. We laid down some joist tape, then got started on the border. After determining the correct amount of overhang, these border pieces got face screwed every foot or so. Once both were done, we could screw in the first set of clips. These clips are purchased separately and come with the right drill bit inside. When installing the clips, an important tip is to lightly screw each clip in and leaving it loose. This is so that when the next board slides into place, there's some wiggle room for the clips to attach. Once the next board is set, you can then go back and tighten each one of those previous clips. After about the first two boards, we got into a good rhythm and we began to fly through the rest of it. We worked on the deck a few hours after work over 2 days, so you could say it roughly took us about half a day's work to complete the decking. So with that, day 3 and 4 were wrapped up and this backyard is over halfway done. On day 5, we were tasked with the patio. All the stone arrived and it was a lot. And to top it off, there was only 2 of us that day to move it all. We gave the patio area one more rake and level just to triple check everything. We then set up our string lines to find our starting point for the patio stones. This is crucial as it's our guide when laying each stone and making sure the entire patio is square. And to give you an idea, these are the main patio stones. These are the border stones. Here's the retaining wall blocks. These are for the walkway along the house, and those are the caps for the wall plus a step for the deck. With the string lines all set, we started with one of many trips back and forth lugging all these stones to the backyard. The first row we laid were the black border stones. Even with a string line to guide us, we had to make sure the first 2 rows of stones were precise since they would essentially dictate the rest of the stones. We took our time with these until we felt comfortable and everything was in line. With it all checking out, we were able to pick up the pace and got right to it. And for the stones, we were going with a random pattern, breaking up any straight lines that started to form along the way. The retaining wall was next, which wasn't too big of a job. It consisted of 2 rows of block, which we got to laying after checking for level. And just like that, this thing was complete, and so was day 5. Day 6 was all about loose ends. It started with capping off the wall with the stone tops, which required more cutting. We then finished off this bump out area of the patio that we left for last. Black edging that holds the perimeter stones were also set into place around the entire patio. With that checked off the list, it was time for the sand. This sand fills all the joints and locks it together. When wet, the sand hardens, creating a sealed joint, almost like grout on interior tiles. Once it was all brushed in, we went around with the hose on a light setting, giving it all a good soak. And after giving it a moment to dry and settle in, we brought in the step and set it in place. Up next was the soil. We still had low spots to fill in, so we added it where it was needed. As you can tell, this backyard is basically done. There were just 2 tasks left that I tackled myself, both taking a half day each. The first task was this privacy fence. We bought this kit from Home Depot that was very straightforward to build. We also picked up some screws and deck boards, and I got right to it. I had 3 posts to screw into the deck, but before I do, I had to find the exact locations while checking to make sure it was plumb and level. I used painter's tape instead of a pencil since it was easier to see and more precise. Having a second person would have made things easier, but it could still be done by yourself. The locations were all set and I screwed each post into place and double checked it was plumb. With the hard part out of the way, I got to work cutting and installing each plank. This fence kit gives you spacers which evenly spaces out each board. There really is minimal room for error. And just like that, the fence was built in no time. The second task I took on myself was the raised garden bed behind the retaining wall. Before adding soil, I added this felt mat behind the wall so that helps prevent muddy water seeping through if it somehow found its way through. You could argue a weeping tile should have been added as well, but this is a short wall and there wasn't much slope to begin with. I then moved over to this small garden area and added a layer of soil to it. I finished with just enough light out, and that is all for day 7. We did the side walkway on another half day, and that pretty much wraps up our backyard makeover. With a total of 8 days work between the 4 of us, we took this backyard from looking like this to this. Over the course of a month, we worked on this backyard whenever we had free days available. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned we got quoted from a local contractor. This total included all materials and labor and had a timeline of 5 to 7 days. And here's a breakdown of our costs for materials plus machine rentals. Obviously, when comparing the two, there is quite the difference of cost. The main takeaway would be the amount of time it took away from our schedule to do the work, and I would say it's well worth hiring a contractor if you don't want to dirty your hands and have a strict timeline. If not, I definitely encourage you to take on projects yourself, even if it's something small. You'd be surprised how much you can learn from a simple YouTube video, and hopefully you learned something here today. Thanks for watching, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.